The rain came down like bullets that night, hammering against the windows of Maya Chen's veterinary clinic with a violence that made her flinch. She had stayed late again, not because of any emergency, but because the silence of her small apartment upstairs felt heavier than the storm outside. The clinic was her sanctuary, sterile, purposeful, filled with the soft breathing of recovering animals rather than the echo of her own loneliness. She was cleaning surgical instruments when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A soft thud against the front door, followed by what might have been a groan. Maya froze, her hand still submerged in the antiseptic solution. Living 20 miles outside of Pine Ridge, visitors after dark were rare and usually meant trouble. The sound came again, weaker this time, like something sliding down the door. Maya dried her hands quickly and moved toward the front of the clinic, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could make out a dark shape huddled against the entrance. "Hello?" she called through the door, her voice barely audible over the storm. No response. Maya hesitated, her father's warnings echoing in her mind. He had taught her to be careful, especially as a woman living alone in such an isolated place. But her medical training overrode her caution as she noticed the figure wasn't moving at all now. She unlocked the door and pulled it open, immediately soaked by the driving rain. A man lay collapsed against the doorframe, his expensive-looking coat torn and muddied, dark hair plastered to his scalp. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. "Sir. Can you hear me?" Maya knelt beside him, her veterinary instincts kicking in as she checked his pulse. Strong but rapid. No visible injuries, but his skin was cold and clammy. Hypothermia, most likely. She couldn't leave him there to die. Maya struggled to get the stranger inside, his weight considerable even though he appeared lean beneath the soaked clothing. She managed to drag him into the clinic's waiting area, where she quickly assessed him under the fluorescent lights. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe early 30s, with sharp cheekbones and skin that suggested he spent time outdoors despite his clearly expensive clothes. His coat was cashmere, she realized, and his boots were handmade leather. But what caught her attention most was his left hand. A ring circled his fourth finger, not a wedding band, but something far more striking. Platinum, by the look of it, set with what appeared to be rare blue diamonds surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light even in his unconscious state. Maya had never seen anything like it outside of museum displays. The ring alone was probably worth more than her entire clinic. The man stirred, a soft groan escaping his lips. Maya stepped back instinctively as his eyes fluttered open, dark brown, confused, filled with a pain that seemed to go deeper than physical discomfort. "Where?" he began, then stopped, taking in his surroundings. His gaze found Maya, and she saw wariness replace confusion. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You collapsed at my door," Maya said gently. "You're hypothermic. We need to get you warm and dry." He tried to sit up too quickly and swayed, one hand going to his head. "I should go. I don't want to cause trouble." "You'll die if you go back out there tonight." Maya's tone was firm, her medical training overriding social awkwardness. "The storm's not letting up, and you're in no condition to travel." The stranger looked toward the windows, where rain continued its assault, then back at Maya. She saw the moment he realized he had no choice. "David," he said finally. "My name is David." Something in the way he said it made Maya suspect it wasn't entirely true, but she nodded. "Maya. Dr. Maya Chen. This is my clinic." She helped him to his feet, noting how he favored his right side and the way his eyes darted toward the windows as if expecting something, or someone, to appear out of the storm. "There's a small apartment upstairs," Maya said. "You can rest there tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." David, if that was really his name, looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with something that might have been shame. "I don't have money to pay you," he said quietly. "Not with me, anyway." Maya's eyes flicked involuntarily to the ring on his finger. He noticed and quickly closed his hand into a fist. We'll worry about that later, she said, though questions were multiplying in her mind like cells under a microscope. Who was this man? Why was he alone in a storm with nothing but expensive clothes and a ring worth a fortune? And why did he look like he was running from something far more dangerous than the weather? As she led him upstairs to her small apartment, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that letting this stranger into her life was going to change everything. The ring caught the light once more as he gripped the banister, and she found herself wondering if some treasures were too costly to keep, and too dangerous to give away. Maya woke to the sound of her coffee maker gurgling and the smell of eggs cooking. For a moment, she forgot about the stranger downstairs until she heard his voice, low, careful, speaking to one of her patients. "Easy there, girl. I know it hurts, but you're going to be fine." She pulled on her robe and padded down to the clinic, finding David crouched beside the kennel that housed Luna, a German shepherd recovering from surgery to remove a tumor. The dog's tail wagged weakly as David spoke to her in soothing tones. "She's been restless all night," Maya said softly, not wanting to startle either of them. David looked up, and in the morning light, she could see him more clearly. The expensive clothes were clean now, though still bearing traces of yesterday's ordeal. The ring remained on his finger, impossible to ignore. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. Heard her whimpering. "I hope you don't mind, I just sat with her for a while." Maya's heart softened. Anyone who would comfort a suffering animal couldn't be entirely dangerous, thank you. "She's been through a lot." "Haven't we all?" David murmured, then seemed to catch himself. He stood quickly. "I made breakfast. Thought it was the least I could do." Over eggs and coffee, Maya found herself studying him. His hands were soft but bore small scars, not from manual labor, but from something else. When he thought she wasn't looking, his fingers would unconsciously turn the ring, and she caught glimpses of an inscription on the inside. "The ring," she said finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "It's beautiful." David's hand stilled. "It was my mother's." "Was?" "She died when I was 15, his voice carried a weight that suggested the loss still haunted him. "Cancer. She made me promise to never take it off." Maya felt a pang of sympathy, but something didn't add up. "David, I need to ask, are you in some kind of trouble?" He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Why would you think that?" "Expensive clothes, a ring worth more than most people's houses, and you show up in the middle of nowhere with nothing else. Either you're running from something, or you're not who you say you are." The silence stretched between them until David finally spoke. "Both, actually." Maya's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" David stood and walked to the window, staring out at the mountain landscape. "My real name is Damien Rothschild. Does that mean anything to you?" Maya's breath caught. Everyone knew the Rothschild name, one of the most powerful pharmaceutical dynasties in the world. "You're the missing heir." "Yes," Damien turned back to her, his expression grim. "The family's golden boy who disappeared 6 months ago and left behind a very angry board of directors." "Why?" Maya whispered. Damien was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice flat and emotionless, as if recounting someone else's nightmare. "I discovered that our company's new arthritis medication was killing people. Not just side effects, actual deaths. The trials were falsified, the data buried. When I confronted my Uncle Richard, the CEO, he told me it was the cost of progress. Acceptable losses for the greater good." Maya felt sick. "How many people?" 43 that we know of. "Probably more." Damien's hands clenched into fists. "I threatened to go public. That's when I learned just how far my family would go to protect their empire." "What happened?" "They tried to have me committed. Said I was having a breakdown, that the stress of inheriting the company was too much. I barely escaped before they could have me declared mentally incompetent and strip me of my inheritance." Maya stared at him, processing the enormity of what he was telling her. "So you've been running." Living off-grid, staying in small towns, paying cash for everything. But they're still looking for me. They need me back, alive but controllable, to maintain the facade of family unity for the shareholders. And the ring? Damien looked down at his hand. It's the only thing I kept. My mother suspected what kind of people she'd married into. Before she died, she told me this ring would be my proof when the time came to choose between family and conscience. Maya felt a chill. Proof of what? The inscription inside isn't just her initials. It's a key, literally. She hid evidence of the company's corruption in a safety deposit box. The ring opens it. Maya sank into her chair, overwhelmed. She'd offered shelter to a stranger and discovered she was harboring the key to bringing down one of the world's most powerful corporations. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Damien met her eyes, and she saw something vulnerable there. Because you saved my life last night, and because. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words, because for the first time in months, I feel like I might have found somewhere I could stop running. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at this man, Damien, who had stumbled into her quiet life carrying secrets that could get them both killed. The smart thing would be to ask him to leave, to pretend this conversation never happened. Instead, she found herself asking, "What do you need?" "Time," he said simply. "Somewhere safe to figure out how to use what I know without getting us both killed." Maya looked around her clinic, at Luna sleeping peacefully in her kennel, at the life she'd built in this remote place, at the man who'd brought danger and possibility in equal measure to her door. "Okay," she said quietly. "But we do this my way. Carefully. And if you put my animals or my neighbors in danger, I'll leave," Damien finished. "I promise." As if summoned by their conversation, Maya's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Dr. Chen. This is Detective Sarah Morrison. I'm investigating a missing person case, and I believe the individual may have passed through your area. Would it be possible for me to stop by your clinic this afternoon to ask a few questions?" Maya's eyes met Damien's across the table. His face had gone pale, but his jaw was set with determination. "Of course," Maya heard herself saying. "I'll be here all day." As she hung up, she realized there was no turning back now. The hunter had found their trail. Detective Sarah Morrison had been tracking Damien Rothschild for 3 months, and she was very good at her job. Too good, perhaps, which was why she'd been chosen for this particular assignment. The Rothschild family wanted their missing heir found quietly, efficiently, and with no uncomfortable questions asked. She parked her rental car outside Maya's clinic at exactly 2 o'clock, noting the isolated location and single escape route. Perfect place to corner a fugitive, if that's what Damien Rothschild had become. Maya answered the door with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Detective Morrison. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Dr. Chen." Sarah flashed her credentials, legitimate, though her real employer wasn't the police department listed on the badge. "I'm looking for this man." She held up a photo of Damien, taken from his corporate headshots before he'd disappeared. Maya studied the picture with careful neutrality. "I don't recognize him. What's he suspected of?" "He's not a suspect," Sarah said, watching Maya's face for tells. "He's been missing for 6 months. His family is very worried about his mental state." "I see." Maya stepped aside to let Sarah into the clinic. "I don't get many visitors out here, Detective. Mostly just locals bringing in sick animals." Sarah nodded, but her trained eye was already cataloging details. 2 coffee cups on the small table in the waiting area, both recently used. A man's jacket hanging on the coat rack, expensive fabric that didn't match the rural setting. And something else, the subtle tension in Maya's shoulders that suggested she was hiding something. "Mind if I look around?" Sarah asked casually. "Of course not. Though I should mention, I have some animals recovering from surgery, so please keep your voice down." As they walked through the clinic, Sarah noticed more signs of a second occupant. An extra plate in the small sink. A pillow and blanket folded neatly on the couch in Maya's office. Fresh flowers in a vase, the kind of touch a woman might make when she wanted to impress someone. Dr. Chen, Sarah said carefully, have you had any overnight guests recently? The family I'm working for has reason to believe their son might seek out veterinarians. He's always had a soft spot for animals. Maya's step faltered slightly. Why would they think that? Because he's done it before. Small towns, isolated practices, places where he could lay low. Sarah stopped walking and fixed Maya with a direct stare. Places where a kind-hearted doctor might take pity on a stranger. The silence stretched between them until Maya finally spoke. Detective, if someone came to me injured and needing help, I'd treat them regardless of who they were. That's my oath. Admirable, Sarah said. But this man is dangerous, Dr. Chen. His family believes he's having a psychotic break. He could hurt you without meaning to. Maya's chin lifted slightly. And you believe them? The question caught Sarah off guard. In her 15 years of private investigation, few people had challenged her story so directly. Why wouldn't I? Because you're not really a police detective, are you? Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon. Excuse me. Your badge says Metro PD, but you're driving a rental car with Colorado plates. Metro PD is based in Nevada. Also, your story doesn't add up. Why would local police send a detective 3 states away to look for someone who isn't even a criminal suspect? Sarah had underestimated the veterinarian. Maya Chen was sharper than she'd appeared, and Sarah found herself grudgingly impressed. You're right, Sarah admitted. I'm a private investigator. The family hired me because they want to avoid publicity. Or because they want to avoid scrutiny. Sarah studied Maya's face. What do you know about the Rothschild family, Dr. Chen? Enough to know that a man might have good reasons for running from them. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, an uncomfortable recognition that she'd felt before on cases that didn't sit right. You've talked to him. I've talked to a lot of people, Maya said carefully. Dar. Chen, I need you to understand something. The Rothschild family has resources you can't imagine. If they think you're helping Damien, they won't just send investigators next time. Maya's face paled, but her voice remained steady. Is that a threat, detective? It's a warning. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Maya a series of photos, a burned-out house in Montana, a car accident in Wyoming, a veterinarian in Colorado who'd been found dead in what appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. These are all people who had contact with Damien Rothschild in the past 6 months. Maya stared at the photos, her composure finally cracking. You're saying they killed these people? I'm saying they died after helping Damien, and the Rothschild family has made it clear that they consider anyone harboring their son to be an obstacle to his recovery. Sarah watched the color drain from Maya's face and felt a stab of guilt. She'd taken this case for the money, enough to pay off her daughter's medical bills and secure her future. But looking at Maya Chen, a woman who'd clearly opened her home to a stranger out of simple human decency, Sarah began to question what side she was really on. Where is he, Dr. Chen? She asked softly. Maya was quiet for a long moment, then walked to the window. If I tell you, what happens to him? His family says they want him to get help. Proper medical care. And if he doesn't want their help? Sarah didn't answer, which was answer enough. Maya turned back to her, and Sarah saw something in her eyes she hadn't expected, not fear, but determination. Detective Morrison, Maya said quietly, I think you need to hear Damien's side of the story before you decide who the real victim is here. Sarah felt her carefully constructed professional distance beginning to crumble. Dr. Chen. His mother's ring, Maya continued. Did the family mention that? The one thing he kept when he left everything behind? Sarah's breath caught. The Rothschilds had been very specific about recovering a certain piece of jewelry, though they'd claimed it was purely sentimental. What about it? Sarah asked. Ask yourself why a family worth billions would hire someone like you to recover a ring they claim is just a keepsake. Sarah stared at Maya, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to click into place. The rushed timeline. The threats disguised as concern. The suspiciously high fee for what should have been a simple missing person case. Dr. Chen, she said slowly, I think we need to have a longer conversation. Maya nodded toward the stairs leading to her apartment. I think you're right. But detective? You should know that some people are willing to die for the truth. The question is, what are you willing to live with? As they climbed the stairs, Sarah found herself hoping that Damien Rothschild had a very good story, because she was beginning to suspect that everything she'd been told was a lie. Elena Vasquez had lived next to the veterinary clinic for 8 years, and she'd never seen Maya Chen look as worried as she did that morning. From her kitchen window, Elena watched the young doctor pace back and forth on her porch, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing frantically. Elena dried her hands on her apron and walked across the narrow strip of grass that separated their properties. At 73, she'd learned to trust her instincts about people in trouble. Mija, she called softly, everything okay? Maya looked up, and Elena saw fear in her eyes, real fear, the kind that came from knowing you were in over your head. Elena, Maya started, then stopped, glancing toward the clinic as if someone might be listening. Elena had been a nurse for 40 years before retiring to this quiet mountain town. She'd seen her share of secrets and knew when someone needed a safe place to unburden themselves. Come inside, she said gently. We'll have tea. In Elena's warm kitchen, surrounded by the smell of cinnamon and the soft tick of an old clock, Maya finally broke down. The story came out in pieces, the stranger in the storm, his true identity, the detective who wasn't really a detective, and the terrible choice she now faced, and now he wants to turn himself in, Maya finished, wiping her eyes with Elena's handkerchief. He says he won't let me get hurt because of him. Elena had listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded in her lap. When Maya finished, she was quiet for a long moment. The ring, Elena said finally. You said it was platinum with blue stones? Maya nodded. Why? Elena stood and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner of her living room. She pulled out a photo album and flipped through pages until she found what she was looking for. This was taken at St. Mary's Hospital in Denver, 1987, she said, pointing to a black and white photograph of a group of nurses. I was working oncology then. Maya looked at the photo, not understanding. There, Elena pointed to a woman in a hospital bed, surrounded by the nursing staff. Catherine Rothschild. She was dying of brain cancer, very young, maybe 35. She had a little boy who visited every day. Maya's breath caught. Damien's mother. She was terrified, Elena continued. Not of dying, she'd made peace with that. She was terrified of what would happen to her son after she was gone. She said her husband's family were monsters, but she couldn't prove it. Elena turned the page, revealing another photo, Catherine Rothschild's hand, clearly showing the same distinctive ring Maya had seen on Damien's finger. She gave me this, Elena said, pulling a small key from the album's binding. Told me that if anything ever happened to her son, if he ever came looking for the truth about his family, I should give it to him. Maya stared at the key. She knew you'd be here. In this town. No, Mija. But she knew I'd find him when the time was right. I moved here 8 years ago, right after you opened your clinic. Call it fate, call it God's plan, I prefer to think of it as a mother's love reaching across time. Maya felt tears threatening again. Elena, this is dangerous. If the Rothschilds find out you have this. Then we'd better make sure they don't. Elena's voice carried the steel of someone who'd faced down worse threats. But first, I think it's time I met this young man who's got you so worried. They found Damien in the clinic, sitting beside Luna's kennel. The German shepherd had her head resting against the cage door, clearly comforted by his presence. When he looked up and saw Elena, something in his expression shifted. You have your mother's eyes, Elena said gently. Damien went very still. You knew my mother. Catherine was one of my patients. She was a brave woman who loved you very much. Elena held out the key. She asked me to give you this when you were ready to face the truth about your family. Damien took the key with shaking hands. How did you? She knew this day would come. She prepared for it. Elena sat down beside him, her voice soft but firm. She also told me that when you were ready to fight back, you wouldn't be alone. Maya watched as Damien examined the key, his thumb tracing its edges. There's a safety deposit box in Denver. She mentioned it once, but I thought. You thought it was just a dying woman's confusion, Elena finished. But Catherine Rothschild was sharp as a tack right until the end. She documented everything she suspected about your family's business practices. Names, dates, financial records she copied when your father wasn't looking. Why didn't she use it herself? Maya asked. Because she was dying, and she knew they'd just destroy everything after she was gone. But she also knew that someday, her son would need proof. Elena looked at Damien with maternal warmth. She said you had too much of her heart to let evil go unchallenged forever. Damien was quiet for several minutes, turning the key over in his hands. Finally, he looked up at Maya. That detective, Sarah, she's still here. Maya nodded. She's asking questions in town. I think she's starting to doubt what the family told her. Good, Damien said, standing up. Because I'm done running. Elena smiled, the expression transforming her lined face. Your mother would be proud. Elena, Maya said worriedly, if we do this, if we expose the Rothschilds, there's no going back. They'll come after all of us. The older woman reached out and took both of their hands in hers. Mija, I've been fighting powerful men who think money makes them untouchable since before you were born. The only thing necessary for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. Luna whimpered softly from her kennel, and Damien automatically reached through the bars to comfort her. The simple gesture, this powerful heir to a fortune, gently stroking an injured dog while planning to destroy his own family, crystallized everything Maya had come to understand about him. All right, she said quietly. What do we do first? Elena squeezed their hands. First, we have a conversation with Detective Morrison. I think she needs to understand exactly who she's been working for. And then, Damien asked. Elena's smile turned sharp. Then we go to Denver and open your mother's gift. It's time the world learned what the Rothschild family has been hiding. As if summoned by their resolve, Maya's phone rang. Sarah Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Dar. Chen. I need to see you again. Alone. There are some things about this case that don't add up, and I think you might have answers. Maya looked at Damien and Elena, then made her choice. Detective, I think it's time you met some people who can tell you the whole truth. Can you come to the clinic in an hour? Yes. And Dr. Chen? Bring Damien Rothschild with you. It's time we all stopped pretending. Maya hung up and looked at her unlikely allies, a fugitive heir, a retired nurse, and herself, a small-town veterinarian who'd stumbled into a conspiracy that could topple one of the world's most powerful families. Well, she said with a shaky laugh, I guess we're really doing this. Elena patted her shoulder. Sometimes the most important battles choose us, Mija. We just have to be brave enough to fight them. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, but Maya no longer felt afraid of what they might bring. The confrontation Sarah Morrison had been dreading came at dawn. She'd spent the night in Pine Ridge's only motel, wrestling with a choice that would define the rest of her career, and possibly her life. The call from Richard Rothschild came as she sat in her rental car outside Maya's clinic, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Detective Morrison, his voice carried the cold authority of someone used to absolute obedience. I trust you have good news for me. Mr. Rothschild, there are some complications with the case. What kind of complications? Sarah took a breath, knowing her next words would change everything, the kind that make me think your nephew might be telling the truth about your family. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. When Richard finally spoke, his voice held a dangerous edge. "Detective, I think you've been isolated in that backwater town too long. It's affecting your judgment." "My judgment is fine. But I've learned some interesting things about the people who've helped Damien over the past few months. The ones who ended up dead. Unfortunate coincidences. All of them. Including the veterinarian in Colorado who was killed the day after you knew I'd traced Damien there." Another pause. "Detective Morrison, you're walking into territory you don't understand. Your job is to locate my nephew and facilitate his return home for medical treatment. Nothing more. And if he doesn't want to come home, then you make him want to." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah looked toward the clinic, where she could see Maya moving around inside, probably preparing for another day of caring for injured animals while harboring a man whose family wanted him disappeared. "Mr. Rothschild," Sarah said carefully, "I'm going to need some assurances about Damien's safety before I can proceed. The only assurance you need is that your final payment depends on results. We've been more than generous with your fee, Detective. It would be a shame if that generosity were misplaced." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, then at the clinic, then at the photo of her daughter she kept on her dashboard, the reason she'd taken this case in the first place. Jenny's leukemia treatments weren't covered by insurance, and the Rothschild money would ensure her daughter's future. But at what cost? Sarah got out of the car and walked toward the clinic, her decision crystallizing with each step. Some prices were too high to pay, even for love. Inside, she found Maya, Damien, and an elderly woman she didn't recognize sitting around a small table covered with photographs and documents. They looked up as she entered, wariness and hope warring in their expressions. "Detective Morrison," Maya stood carefully. "Thank you for coming." "Before we start," Sarah said, pulling out her phone and setting it on the table, "you should know that Richard Rothschild just threatened me. Indirectly, but clearly. He wants his nephew back, and he doesn't care how I make it happen." Damien's jaw tightened. "That sounds like Uncle Richard." "This is Elena Vasquez," Maya said, indicating the older woman. She knew Damien's mother. Elena stood and extended her hand to Sarah. "Detective, I think there are some things you need to see." Over the next hour, Sarah's understanding of the case, and her own complicity, underwent a complete transformation. Elena's photographs and documents painted a picture of Catherine Rothschild as a woman who'd suspected her husband's family of corruption and had spent her final years gathering evidence. The arthritis medication was just the latest, Damien explained, spreading out copies of financial records. "There's a pattern going back decades. Rushed drug approvals, buried safety studies, intimidation of researchers who raised concerns." Sarah studied the documents, her investigative instincts recognizing the hallmarks of a massive cover-up. "Why haven't you gone public with this?" "Because everyone who's tried has ended up dead," Maya said quietly. "Including the people who helped Damien." "The Colorado veterinarian," Sarah said, the pieces clicking into place. "You knew I'd traced Damien there." Damien nodded grimly. "Dr. Martinez was a good man. He deserved better than to die for helping me." Sarah felt sick. Her investigation had led the Rothschilds directly to someone who'd offered shelter to their fugitive nephew, and that person was now dead. The blood money in her bank account suddenly felt like exactly that. "There's more," Elena said, producing the key Catherine Rothschild had given her. "A safety deposit box in Denver with evidence that could bring down the entire company." "Then why are we sitting here?" Sarah asked. "Why not go get it?" "Because they're watching the bank," Damien replied. "Have been for months. The moment I show up, it's over." Sarah considered this, her mind working through the tactical problems. "Not necessarily. They're watching for you, not for a private investigator working on their behalf." The others stared at her. "You're suggesting?" Maya began. "I'm suggesting that Detective Morrison might have found Damien Rothschild, convinced him to reveal the location of his mother's evidence, and volunteered to retrieve it as a show of good faith before bringing him in. Damien shook his head. Too dangerous. If they suspect you've switched sides, then we'd better make sure they don't. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'm going to call Richard Rothschild and tell him I've found you. That you're scared and ready to come home, but you want some assurance that you won't be committed against your will. And then? Then I drive to Denver, get the evidence, and we figure out how to use it without getting everyone killed. Elena reached across the table and covered Sarah's hand with her own. Why are you doing this, detective? Your original employer won't be happy. Sarah thought of her daughter, of the treatments she still needed, of the life Sarah had hoped to secure for her. Then she looked at Damien, a man who'd given up everything to stop his family from killing more innocent people, and Maya, who'd risked her life to help a stranger because some things are more important than money, she said finally. And because I have a daughter who needs to grow up in a world where people like the Rothschilds can't buy their way out of consequences. The plan they developed was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Sarah would retrieve the evidence while the others remained hidden at the clinic. If anything went wrong, Damien and Maya would run, leaving Elena to play the role of an innocent neighbor who knew nothing about anything. And if it works? Maya asked. Damien looked at her, and Sarah saw something pass between them that made her think of her own husband, dead 3 years now from the same disease that had claimed Catherine Rothschild. Then we finish what my mother started, Damien said quietly. We make sure no one else dies from my family's greed. Sarah stood to leave, then paused. Damien, when this is over, assuming we all survive, what will you do? He glanced at Maya, at the clinic where Luna was recovering in her kennel, at the mountains visible through the windows. I think, he said slowly, I'd like to find out what it means to have a home instead of just a trust fund. Maya's hand found his across the table, and Sarah smiled despite the danger they all faced. All right then, she said, checking her weapon and pocketing the key. Let's go save the world. As Sarah drove toward Denver, her phone rang one final time. Richard Rothschild's number appeared on the screen, but she didn't answer. Instead, she turned off the phone and pressed harder on the accelerator. Behind her, in a small mountain clinic, a veterinarian and a fugitive heir sat holding hands while an elderly nurse kept watch, all of them waiting to learn whether justice was possible in a world where money usually bought silence. The ring on Damien's finger caught the morning light, and for the first time since his mother's death, it felt like a promise instead of a burden. 3 hours later, Sarah Morrison walked into a Denver bank with a key and a story, ready to discover what Catherine Rothschild had died protecting. In her heart, she carried the faces of everyone who'd been killed to keep the Rothschild secrets buried. It was time to bring them all into the light. By evening, the story would be in the hands of investigative journalists at 3 major newspapers. By the end of the week, congressional hearings would be announced. And in a small mountain town, a veterinarian and the man she'd come to love would begin planning a future built on truth instead of lies. The ring that had once symbolized burden and grief became, finally, exactly what Catherine Rothschild had intended, the key to freedom, justice, and the possibility of home.